Welcome to the show. I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell me a little bit about your position and how that kind of ties into human services.
Okay. First of all, thank you for letting me be on this show. I live a very exciting life with what I do. A few years ago, 15 years ago, I was asked to move to the United States from Canada, where I used to be an underground hard rock miner. And I belonged to the Steelworkers Union all through that tenure from 1970 to 2005 when I moved down to Pittsburgh, our head office. When I moved down, the reason for me moving down to Pittsburgh was to head up a new program that we were developing where we were an advocate for families that had experienced a traumatic loss in their life on the job. Someone on the job was killed or a critical injury. And in our union today, the Steelworkers Union, we average a fatality every 5 to 7 days, and we average a critical injury every 7 to 11 days. So when I moved down, it was a brand new program. I had some experience in Canada with a lot of death and trauma working in the mine, if you can imagine. We worked down 3 to 4,000 feet every day in a very unforgiving environment, unforgiving, huge equipment. Whatever it was very dangerous. So in the 1970s, when I was a young man of 20 years old, I was underground, and we had 12 to 15 fatalities a year, and nothing was done about it. See, the Vietnam War opened up a lot of dialogue about post-traumatic stress disorder. Before that, every war people came back from, they had terms, they had terminology: battle fatigue, uh, battle scarred. But post-traumatic stress was really well thought of in the mental health sector. So an injury to one, as Mother Jones said years ago, an injury to one is an injury to all. So we've learned the hard way that we spend more waking hours in our workplaces than we do in our homes. So when someone is injured or killed, it's like being in a family. It affects you. This was all brought to light in 2009 when I had a young intern come with me, and he had just completed 2 tours in Iraq. And he came with me to the USW, or the United Steelworkers Emergency Response Team, as an intern. And he was studying just what I spoke about: post-traumatic stress with blue-collar workers. A lot of research had been done in the military, firefighters, but none in the blue-collar sector. So he spent 4 or 5 months with me, traveled with me to the families. Then he did exploring in mining, lumbering, manufacturing, oil refineries, 4 or 5 different sectors, and his results really were surprising. It was found that United Steelworkers have more cases of post-traumatic stress than the military, firefighters, and police officers. So that's
Whoa.
published. Yes. So that's published. And when he gave the presentation, he thought that he would be laughed off the stage in New York at the Post Traumatic Stress Disorder Symposium, worldwide event. And it was very well received because someone knows somebody who was killed in the job or injured on the job, on the way to work, on the way home from work. So just before I dropped the subject, I asked him, what's the key thing that he learned from the research? And the key thing is this: when you work at a workplace and you have someone killed or injured, a friend of yours, you have to go back in that workplace. You have to go by that same machine every day. If you're a firefighter in the Marines or in the military, or in the police department, you don't necessarily go to the same intersection or the same building to have that same experience. So we have the repetitiveness of seeing that same situation, that same area that killed someone that was close to us.
Makes me wince, the idea of having to return to the same, you know, the same trauma, returning to work to the same trauma every day. And when we first spoke, what I found baffling was um, the niche of blue collar workers, right? Is so little, there's so little attention given to that. I also
Mm-hmm.
noticed that there's a really great show on Hulu about opiate addiction and about how miners in, Kentucky and Virginia, how they were kind of the guinea pigs of that epidemic, and still today. So you found yourself in a position to help people that were just like you, in the sense of the work that you gave and the time and such. Tell me a little bit more about your personal experiences that brought you to a point where you could help others, such as blue collar workers in mining.
Okay. The personal experience I had was going back to Canada, where I was raised, and going to work underground in a mine up in northern Ontario, nickel mine, copper, where there were 20,000 miners at that time, all men, underground. And it was a company town. It was a company bunkhouse we lived in. 44 men lived in a bunkhouse. Every person there had a demon chasing them, whether it was the law, whether it was an addiction, whether it was whatever it was. They all had demons chasing them. The money was really fantastic. We didn't need much education. And there was an old saying, when you get hired underground, you leave your brain on surface and bring your back with you underground. And then you pick up your brain at the end of the day, because it was all physical work. So when you're down three quarters of a mile, you develop such a bond between the men that work there, because we have to trust each other with our lives. We're handling dynamite, explosives. I like to say this. I was at the face, that's what they call the production miner, when you're drilling the face with a big drill and then you load it with dynamite and then you blast it. And we walked back in. The first thing I thought of was, no one else in this entire world is looking at what I'm looking at right now, because it's been rock that's been there for tens and tens of thousands of years. We disturb the rock. We see that. And that's the tightness that brings us together, because there's so many injuries. So when someone was killed, I had a van. I used to drive men to work. I had a 15-passenger van. I had 14 men travel with me. It's a 40-mile highway trip. And one day coming home, there were 3 empty seats. There were 3 empty seats were there because they were killed all in the same accident that same day. I can tell you this, that van was very, very, very quiet going home that night. The bosses used to say to us, if you need a day off, just get drunk or get stoned or whatever you do. We may or may not pay you, but come back in a day or two, and that's life. They used to say to us, when you hired on in the mine, you knew it was a dangerous job. You're not working in a cannery factory. So that's what you get for making big money. That's the risk factor. So that's all that was done. I didn't deal with that very well. In 1987, on June the 3rd, that was a very, very important date in my life, because I had a decision to make. My choices have put me in a spot where I had three choices to make that day. One was to buy a gun and commit suicide quickly. The other choice was to continue my path of alcoholism and end up in some sort of institution, probably in a very short period of time. Or what I didn't really want to do was to quit drinking. I detested people that were happy, successful, happily married, rich or wealthy. and sober, I detested them. I detested everything that I wasn't. And today I am everything that I just described. And I just think it's fantastic. So where did I go for help? I went to the Steelworkers Union. I would not go to the company because I didn't trust the company. So I bring that with me fast forward to the emergency response team program when we dispatch people out of Pittsburgh to go to these families to help them. We do not bring in the counselors that the companies and corporations have where that person was killed because we don't trust them. And that's a sad statement, but we just don't trust the corporations to be in a better judgment of their employees. That's what I learned in Canada. So I went and got help that day. Part of my addiction problem was seeing all those friends of mine killed and critically injured and having a lot of close calls myself. That was the beginning of it.
Oof. Just my imagination is just, I'm picturing every moment that you've just described, and I can't, it is fascinating to think you were at the precipice of something no one else was seeing at the time. But you were also trapped in the sense that, it was so dangerous. And yet there was, as well known as that was to you and your friends and your companies, that there was still little so done at the time to prepare you for the consequences, besides saying, you know what you signed up for, so good luck. How long after you went to get help, did you find yourself, or did you see that there was a greater need, not just for you and those around you, but for people in your union as a whole? At some point, I imagine that you turned around and you saw you weren't the only one dealing with these kind of PTSD problems.
That's a great question. When I finally got sober, I would say the first year, I needed a lot of help the first year. It took me a year to get through all of the decisions that I had made, poor decisions or not. It took me a year to get that stabilized. And then I started looking around because there's something in the world of Alcoholics Anonymous when people reached out. See, complete strangers reached out to help me. Once I asked for help, they reached out. The people I drank with, they were in a different world. They didn't offer. I didn't expect them to, but there was no help there. They were all new friends. So I kept saying to my sponsor, Jim, these people are helping me. How can I pay them back? He said, don't pay them back. You pay it to someone else in your future. You be other-centered, not self-centered.
Oh, say that again?
Be other-centered, not self-centered. See, in the world of alcoholism, people forget about the ism, the I, self, and me. They focus on the alcohol. But the I, self, and me was the problem. Drinking was not my problem. Drinking was a solution to my problems. There's an old saying, older than I am. If you get a drunken horse thief sober, you still got a horse thief. So I had to mine. I spent 20 years mining 4,000 feet underground. The only day I ever saw the depth of where I spent the majority of my life was at Las Vegas at the Grand Canyon when I walked out on that plexiglass walkway and the sign said 4,000 feet below is the Snake River. I could visually see the distance I had worked underground. But my story begins when I got sober and realized that I could help others, was when I mined the 18 inches from my head to my heart. That was the most difficult mining I ever had to do because I had to look at me, I, self, and me. all my flaws, all my imperfections, all my attitudes, everything that I had grown up with. I had to dissect that. But however, the richness that I have found in here is much more valuable than the richness that I ever found in Mother Earth in 20 years. That's what I use, and it's endless. So I don't say that to impress anybody. I say it to impress upon you that if I have it in here, everyone has it in there, in you.
Oh my, you are the essence of what I think is missing so often, historically, geographically, and just culturally across all realms and alleyways of service to other people. That energy and that attitude that you've mined out of yourself. Please tell me a little bit more of how important that is to your work, right? So would you say that you are able to, you're a better leader and a director because you understand yourself so much better?
You're asking me if my experiences have made me better at doing what I do today?
Yes, and specifically the time that you spent excavating yourself as a person, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah. It took 5 years. It took 5 years for me to understand who I was. Because when I quit drinking, I had three things that were in my head. One was, who am I? I was a 36-year-old father of three, had lost my family, but I was still a father of three. I had a job that demanded safety consciousness, but I didn't know who I was. I had no idea who Allan McDougall was. When I went to Sunday school as a little boy, I heard this phrase all the time, knock and it shall be opened. But that was in my mind and in my psyche, but I couldn't understand it. So it made me delve into who I am. The other one was fear knocked, faith answered. No one was there. See, I was scared. I wouldn't like myself. My biggest fear when I quit drinking was I didn't think anybody would like me if I quit drinking. That's how much energy I put into my drinking part.
wow. Yeah.
And the other thing is this, no matter where you go, there you are. So I had to learn who I was in order to be able to give my experience, strength, and hope to others to show them that it's possible.
Oh, I've got goosebumps. You're right, and I know that it's very gentle and easier for you to share your story, and so, but something that hums and continuously does is this need for service providers, no matter whether they come directly from human services discipline or maybe they found themselves there or in this discipline another way, is this hum of like, how well do you know yourself and how well can you understand yourself as a role, in these different communities or to other people. But before I get too far into that, I wanted to kind of take a step back and talk about the needs within a union. Something that blew my mind when we first spoke was that many of us can assume that companies are not always thinking about those that they serve or the people that they employ first and foremost. And you found a way to create a program or a response to that lack of care. How often do you see that, and what have you been able to change in the universe of mining and unions as a whole since the 70s when you kind of introduced all of these new ideas?
Okay, so the emergency response team program, thank you for the question. When the emergency response team, when I moved down to Pittsburgh to head it up as a director, it only had one aspect to it, and that was it was inherited from another union. When they merged with us, with steelworkers, they brought this program with them. And it was very basic in the beginning because they had a small union. It was a small number of people, 25,000 people. So we didn't need the magnitude of there wasn't the magnitude of the problem. when you move into the Steelworkers Union, who had a membership at that time of a little over 1 million members in North America. So I was given this task, and the first thing I did was, I'm only as smart as the people that I surround myself with. When I removed myself, then I became successful. So I knew that if there was a fatality today, the way the program was run, we just went to the family and said, here, I'm from the union. Here's my card. Give me a call if you need anything, and leave. I've always said the Steelworkers was a union of substance. If I'm going to be a director in the department, I want a department of substance. How do you get substance? By having follow-up, by having accountability. That's the word, accountability. So when I got it going, I went and got volunteers from across North America. Now we have 64 people qualified and trained to go to these families. And we just don't go the same day as the accident. We do follow up for a year. No other program has that. Because just like when I got sober, it took me a year to get a base, just to get a base start. I put that onto the families. It takes a year to get started, to get over the loss, because we're going through the first Christmas, the first birthday, the first anniversary, all those memories. See, our first call, when we walk into a family the same day as the fatality happened or the next day, here's a scenario. It's a kitchen table, usually. There are the neighbors. They brought all the food. There is the faith base. There is the company representative. Families come in, even though they haven't spoken to each other for 10 years, they show up. And then there's us. That's the first visit. And nobody really in the family, the affected widow or the widower or the parents or the sons and daughters of this lost their loved one, is not even there. They're there, but they're not there. The second visit, I'll tell you what the second visit is like. We go in 2 to 3 weeks later. We walk into the house, we knock on the door and get invited in. We always tell them we're coming. We always use the local union. That was part of their life to be with us. And there's no one there. People have gone back to work. The family's gone home. There may be still some food left over from the neighbors, and they're lost. The families are lost. They don't have any income. See, the second visit is more important than the first. The third visit is more important, and the continuance for a year. We even have so the emergency response team program levels the playing field, because the first thing corporations do when there's a fatality or critical injury, they call their team of lawyers. And that's fine. That's what they do. That's the cost of doing business. But then you have a widow that's her husband or the widower, the wife, has been the breadwinner. Some of them don't even know how to write a check. Some of them don't know what bank they deal with. Some of them don't know they have a life insurance policy. And then I say, well, maybe you could use some legal, because that's the first ERT program came to us with a very, very good law firm that would help the families free of charge. And they say, oh no, my husband and my and his foreman, they've hunted together, they went fishing together. They're going to treat us right. Well, there's 6 lawyers or 4 lawyers in a boardroom in another city that don't even know or care. They just want to get the production running again. So we level the playing field. So part of our job is to educate the families that this is what's happening with your company back there. This is what you may want to do. The other leg of the 3-legged stool is the mental health part, which has just been incorporated in the last 12, 15 years. Post-traumatic stress, which we talked about. We've had research done on suicides in the workplace. See, that's what's happening now, is that people do not want to commit suicide at home because of the residual effect. Where they choose to do a lot of their suicides is in the parking lot of the place they work. They sit in their vehicle and they will call up someone that they know in the plant and say, "Hey, it's Allan McDougall. I'm in the truck, or I'm in the parking lot. Would you come and see me at lunchtime?" And they'll say, "Sure. What's going on? Well, just come out and see me at lunchtime or the break." So, and in the meantime, they commit to suicide. They shoot themselves. So then the person coming out to the plant, that's where they're found. They're not found in the home, in a room in their home, which has a longer term effect. So those are things that people aren't, that brings abnormality to a normal day. So that's where we brought in the mental health part. So we have a lot of research done on the mental health part of witnessing or experiencing a fatality. A lot of our members end up in a burn unit, and they're in drug-induced comas for 2 to 3 months. Then they get hooked on those drugs, then they're cut off, and where do they turn to is $2 heroin or $3 heroin to get the same effect, and then they lose their job. So that's why we do the 1 year. The other leg of the stool, which I haven't talked about, is the health and safety part, where they do an in-depth investigation. So we're all there to wrap ourselves around the family and to protect them and level the playing field.
It's incredible. All of the aspects that I know you've built over time, and with experience, but it just covers so many of the bases that are often forgotten, even in our own daily thinking patterns, right? Like, we care about people going through something, whether we're providing a service or just support, and maybe we only think about it one time. And there's just such a grand scope of care that you have embraced in your work that is required to really actually provide a support system. And I think your story about your own personal experience is like the prelogue to the success that you've had, right? I'm not saying everyone needs to go to the depths of their own personal hell or go to like a retreat or anything. I mean, you said you did it over 5 years. And so, but there's such an importance that you highlight in knowing yourself and then paying attention to the needs of people beyond a certain point, right? Beyond what regular culture and population think is necessary. Man, it's moving. It really is moving, like to be introduced to another group of individuals with their own culture and characteristics and needs, and to hear how, often they kind of just get looked over, I feel like that tends to be a pattern in American history, is blue collar workers, or at least in the last, say 100 years or so, blue collar workers being then passed over, right?
This kind of jumps out to me, if I may.
Of course.
I'd like to just talk about this for 1 minute. Is we are sent there to comfort the family. I could tell you a story. My next book is, when it comes out, is going to be on that. That here's a scenario that touched me and still does. About 12 years ago, I was called up to a fatality north of Pittsburgh. I got there in the afternoon about 4 o'clock with the local union president. We knocked on the door. It was the man had lost his life, and his widow was there, and there was family in the back room. And so here I am, and I still get emotional touching this. See, when you mine out that 18 inches from your head to your heart, when you talk about a feeling in a story, your story goes from here to here, touches that, and then goes back up again. So I experienced that, which is a gift. I think it's a gift. I'm in there trying to comfort her to make sure that her needs are met. Get the vehicle home from work, get his wallet home, get his personal belongings, all that stuff that nobody thinks about.
Right.
Get all that stuff done. Get the whatever is needed for the money, get all that stuff. So here I am sitting in her small room, and she is in the kitchen, and I see her trying to make a coffee for me. And she spilled coffee on the counter, and she was shaking, and so that image is in my heart today, that here I was, a complete stranger, and she was trying to make me comfortable in her home. And she was spilling coffee, and she dropped a cookie, and she was apologizing for taking so long to bring me comfort. I'll never forget that. So we started talking, and I said, "So tell me a little bit about yourself." She said, "Well," she said, "my husband and I were married 6 years. It was second marriages each." She said, we both have our own children." She said, "I have to tell you, Mr. McDougall, blended families aren't always blended." She said, there's lots of trouble sometimes with blended families." She said, "I'm not sure where they even got that word from." And she said, "I had my own residence. He had his own residence. So we had a lot of discussion about, should we sell one, sell them both, fix one up, buy something new?" So she said, then we got into the home renovation section of life. And she said, that is the number one cause of divorces I've heard is home renovations. And she's telling me this. And then she said, and we had a lot of arguments, she said. And then she stopped. And she said, "But today, Mr. McDougall, I am so blessed. I am so blessed." And she was speaking from here. And I said, I took a minute and I said, "How can you say that? Your husband was killed less than 12 hours ago, and you're telling me that you're blessed." She said, "Well, you can hear about all our experiences. I just told you we had second marriages, financial, selling the property, renovations. We were arguing," but she said, "Last night, before he went to work on the night shift, he said, let's go for dinner." We went to an early dinner. We went to a movie. And when I dropped him off at the gate, he leaned over and said, "I love you." She said, "That's why I'm blessed." For that small memory that still affects me today here. So that's what I learned from this program, is how to treat. We just never know when we're not going to be here.
Right.
So those are the invaluable lessons that have comforted me when I'm giving comfort. I
This
just
is the
felt
first time I've
compelled.
cried on this podcast.
I just felt compelled to tell that story. I hope you didn't mind.
No, I'm so glad you did. I'm so very glad that you did. As we wrap up our conversation, I wanted to touch a little bit more about what inspired you to kind of write down all of your lessons and continue, because you mentioned that you're going to write a second book. What inspired you to write your first book, Breaking Through? So this is your first book, and it's quite a cover, right? And it's very enthralling where I've gotten to so far. But at what point did you think to yourself, all right, it's time to write a book?
Well, there's power in the spoken word. In a book that I've read, it said there's life and death in the spoken word. When I went to my first AA meeting, I didn't want to be there. And there was a man spoke these 7 or 10 words, didn't even know me. I'm sitting there and I'm hating everybody, especially myself. And he said, "Hi, everyone. My name is Mike, and I'm an alcoholic." He said, "If I continue this program for 14 more days, I will have 4 years of continued sobriety. And I'm telling you, I took those words out of the air and I put them in here, because that was the first words of hope that I had ever heard in my entire life. Fast forward to 3 months later when I'm sitting in a rehabilitation center for 28 days. They kept me for 35 because they liked me. It wasn't because I was remedial. They liked me. I was I was there for 5 weeks, but there was a speaker come in and said, he told his story and he said, I'm writing a book. And I took those words when I was sober 90 days and put them in here. But I realized I had to have a life of value to write a book of value. I couldn't write a book about just quitting drinking. So I set a benchmark of so many obstacles and so many bars to jump over to get to be a success in society's terms. Then I wrote the book. My deal with a God and my understanding is I wrote the book for two purposes. One for income, the other for impact. And I made the income. God was good to me. I got that income quickly. Now I give the books away when I feel compelled to give the books away. I still sell some, I give them away, but that's a deal I made, one to help others. So I like to think that the book is a part of me, an extension of me that people can read about to get a message of hope, just like that guy told me at my first Alcoholic Anonymous meeting. I never told him that for 10 years. And I saw him 10 years on my anniversary, and I called him up and I said, Mike, you won't remember this, but I said 10 years ago, you gave me my first message of hope. And he cried and I cried, and we're still friends. We talk today. But that was the reason for the book, to give a message of hope. No matter how far down you sink, you can be a help to yourself and to others.
So to finish off our conversation, and thank you so much for sharing that, I'm going to have you come back and tell the story about how the kind of the pieces fell into place in the book creating process, but we'll share that another day. One of the things that you like to say is like, you don't want to help people through, but you want to see people through. Do I have that correct? Tell me a little bit more about where those words came from and where they resonate.
I was looking for what they called a tagline. I was looking for something to have a mantra about, to put all that stuff in here and here into a small line. And I was praying for help. So I went to a Chinese restaurant one day, and I even remember what I ordered. I ordered lettuce wraps, and I'm eating lettuce wraps, and they brought a fortune cookie. And it was just north of Pittsburgh. And I opened up the fortune cookie, and I opened it up and read it, and there it was. And it said just this: it is never my intention to see through people, but to see people through. And I said, wow, thank you so much. And that's my tagline.
I think it's powerful. I think in another life you might have been like a poet or a writer or something, because you've done really well, definitely exhibiting your skills and your experiences through word. Thank you so much for sharing. We are just getting started. I know I definitely need you to come back on and expand a little bit more about just the work and how you've really designed this process of crisis response for people, right? Because it's very little explored. I took one crisis response class and I understand what it looks like, and I understand one way of handling it, but you have so much more wisdom. I hope you're willing to come back on and share a little bit more.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you the story about how the book got into Barnes and Noble.
Oh, yes. All right. That's perfect. Okay. Thank y'all so much. We'll see you on our next episode of Roundtable Discussions podcast.
Thank you.